Well, good afternoon if you are in New York City or Atlanta or places on the Eastern Seaboard, uh, North and South America. Special love to people in Florida and anywhere affected by the tropical storm and hurricane that is affecting us today, which is September 30th, 2022. Good evening to people in the United Kingdom, especially Cheshire and Wales. And good evening to people in Europe and Africa. Special love, as always, to our loved ones in Ukraine. Stay strong, be yourselves, and greetings to people all around the world. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans around the world. As regular visitors know, I like to invite people on this program who inspire me, who I enjoy. I enjoy their work. I enjoy their people who they are as they are. And one of my very favorites, I will say this bluntly, is Susan Bullock, a British soprano who joins us today from Atlanta. I don't know if you want to talk as someone from Atlanta or someone from the United Kingdom, but Susan, welcome.
Thank you very much. I won't trouble you with my attempt at a Southern accent. So,
have you ever had to do different accents in opera?
oh yes, actually, very recently I just did the old lady in Candide for Scottish opera, and we did a version where I was based on Joan Rivers. So I did it in a kind of Joan Rivers voice, singing and speaking, which was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
So Joan Rivers was an American comedian who was a very quick-witted, fast-talking person. And her standard line was, "Can we talk?"
Yeah,
in a New York accent, as in, "Let me tell you the truth."
absolutely.
And she actually claimed to know all the royal family and would gossip, the British royal family, and would gossip about them. And apparently they actually found her quite funny sometimes, and
Yes.
sometimes a bit much, but she would talk about visiting with Charles, visiting with Camilla. And but it was kind of like Dame Edna Everage, if people know that character from Australia, who would really go as far as one could, um, without really giving too much offense. But I think they both have on a lot of occasions, which is fine.
Yeah.
But to me, the old lady, which I once worked with Krista Ludwig when she was working on that, um, is Portuguese, I think.
Well, I think she's a mixture, isn't she? She says she wasn't born in Spain. Her father came from Rovno Gubernia, and I think she can be anything really.
Mm-hmm.
Our version certainly had her as quite a blonde, kind of brassy sort of New Yorker, a la Joan Rivers. Yeah, I mean, she's
Last
very often
month,
done with a Hungarian accent or a
yeah,
Spanish accent. I think it's a bit of like an open field, really.
she says that she's easily assimilated.
That's right. That's right. So she can blend into anywhere.
True.
Yeah.
Last month, in fact, August, I had Jamie Bernstein, the daughter of Leonard Bernstein, on, and we were talking about Candide, which the novel, the book, is one of my very favorite books. And it was created by Bernstein and the playwright Lillian Hellman in the 1950s, based on Voltaire, as a response to McCarthyism and the seemingly encroaching terror and fear and so on. And Candide, the character, is an innocent young man who learns through a lot of terrible experiences, as does Cunegonde, the the soprano, and they are instructed, especially Candide, by a Dr. Pangloss, whose formulation, everything is for the best in the best of all possible worlds, from Voltaire, to me has guided my life. And while Candide, the musical opera by Bernstein, can seem lighthearted, it's one of the most profound works I know.
It is, and I think it deliberately shines a light on all the bad things around us. Racism, sexism, whatever. It's very much holding up a mirror to society, and saying, look, this is the bad stuff, and this young man has such a purity. It's a bit like Parsifal, he has such a purity about him, and needs to go through the world and doesn't need to see this horrible stuff or experience it, but obviously does, but can come out at the other end still in one piece is pretty amazing, really.
So the old lady has a particular anatomical feature, which I have to ask. Did Susan Bullock play the character with one buttock?
I had both. Well, I had both my buttocks in place, I have to say, and I didn't actually have an extension on one of them to make it look uneven. But I did refer to it. Of course, the lines refer to it quite a lot. But no, there was no obvious.
It's a bit like a lower body Rigoletto in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just slipped a bit.
Well, I once saw a production, I'm not kidding, it was an amateur company where they were doing scenes from Rigoletto and other operas, including Cavalleria Rusticana. And they didn't have much funding for their costumes. So the hump that was used for Rigoletto became the pregnant belly for Santuzza.
Well, it's economizing, I suppose.
And then they could have done Candide with the old lady. So, yeah. Susan, among the many things that I really love about your work is you are an artist for whom I never, ever have to look at a projected title, ever, because I understand every word you say in German, in English, which are the languages I've heard you in. I'm sure it would be the same in French. I don't speak Hungarian. I know you're working on a Hungarian role, or Czech, I do not speak. But
well, we're doing Bluebeard here in Atlanta in an English translation.
In English, so, okay. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But was that taught to you? Is that a value you acquired? Because literally every word of the Ring cycle, when I heard you do it in London, I never had to check a translation. I know the Ring, but I understood every word.
Thank you. Well, I think my mission in singing is to tell a story. That's what we do. And so if you can't understand the words, then what are we doing? We're doing it wrong, when I first started, I was a company member at the English National Opera back in the early 80s. And we had a very strict older singer who'd retired called Dennis Dowling. And he used to sit in the orchestra stalls and he would bang his walking stick. And if he couldn't hear what we were saying, he would say, "I can't hear you, dear. I can't hear you." And he'd sort of bark across. And we were all terrified of young singers. And I think I learned about formulating words from him and from working in that theatre. But I think all the way along, I love the text. The acting side of opera is as important, if not more important to me than the actual sound that comes out of my mouth. Obviously one tries to make the best sound one can, but I'm interested in telling the story as an actor, and that's really important. So I don't think I've ever been taught it. It's just something that I relish, and I just relish languages. I love the taste of the language in my mouth, whatever it is, Czech or French or, German, Russian, whatever it could be. I just love languages, and it's about communicating for me, this whole job that we do.
But there must be somewhere in your study and work process where you look at the score, you look at the text, and see that a particular vowel or consonant may be clouded, obstructed in ways that, frankly, many of the finest singers we all know and love screw them up. But in your case, it must be a lot of study and decision making that leads you to reaching 100% clarity, which there are very few singers. Another one is Jonas Kaufmann. I always know what he says in whatever language, but there are very few.
I think, when you're studying a role, and obviously for me, it starts with the text always. I look at the notes as a general. Somebody gives me a new role, I look at the score and think, okay, is there anything in the range in the tessitura that's going to be problematical? And if that's okay, if it suits my range and everything, that's fine. And then look at the text and see if the text speaks to me, as an actor, as a character. And then of course you will suddenly see there's a huge high note with an E on it, or and you have to think, okay, I want that word to be clear, but obviously it's not vocally easy to do it. So you have to sort of just adapt rather, and just moderate it a little bit. But there are ways around it. But as you say, it just takes time and experimentation. And sometimes you'll go, oh no, that sounds horrible. That's too thin and reedy if it's an E vowel. So you have to add a bit of in there, or or something, and then it'll work, but it's just a case of trial and error, I'd say, probably, until you find exactly the right place that makes the word clear but makes it vocally comfortable.
Unless I'm forgetting something, I don't think I've ever heard you sing in Italian. Do you have you done a lot of Italian roles? Yeah.
Not a lot of Italian. I've done fanciulla. I've done years and years ago Rigoletto, and most of my Italian repertoire was done in the ENO, which of course meant it was in, Desdemona, in English. Yeah, I've done Tabaro and Suor Angelica. I've done Butterfly in Italian. I've done quite a lot of Puccini. That's probably the most part of it. And I think I did some Dalla Piccola, Volo di Notte. And,
Luigi Dalla Piccola.
I
asked because Italian can be the easiest language in terms of clarity.
And of course, being me, I end up doing all the ones that aren't easy because that's yeah. But no, I have sung in Italian.
Okay, I asked because I've heard many fine, wonderful singers mess up Italian, and including natives. I don't name names, but there's an Italian soprano who sang a lot of Aidas. I never knew what she was talking about. I had no comprehension, and I speak fluent Italian.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something to do with also where the text comes in somebody's mind as well as the voice. Some people are more just only interested in the sound, and the words don't matter. They're interested in creating this beautiful sound. In my case, it's as I said, it's telling the story, and that's my job.
Speaking technically, is there anything about the placement or positioning of the mouth and your diaphragm and your whole technique that brings the words more forward?
Not that I am aware of particularly. I think it's a lot to do with intention. Your intention is to tell the story, then the words will be clear. If your intention is to make a beautiful mellifluous sound, then the words won't be clear necessarily. Not sometimes, you can do both, but if your priority, should I say, is not to put the words first, then. But to me, that's the drama. Otherwise, these melodies that we sing could be beautifully played on a violin or a flute or a cello, and without words. So that's why we're here.
One role many roles, but one role particularly that I wish I had heard you do was Queen Elizabeth I in Benjamin Britten's Gloriana.
Yeah.
We are now speaking at the end of September, where recently Queen Elizabeth II was buried after 11 days of observances, let's call it. And when I worked at the Metropolitan Opera, I was also responsible when visiting companies came. We had English National Opera, which for people who don't know is another very important London company where all operas are done in English, no matter what language they're originally written in. So I, not too long ago, saw Aida there in a very good production in English. Gloriana was brought by the English National Opera. Sarah Walker played Queen Elizabeth I. And she and other members of the company told me a lot about the original reception the opera had when Queen Elizabeth II became queen, when she was crowned, I suppose is the word, in June of 1953. And they all said that she didn't like it. She didn't like Britain's opera. And to me, that sounds a little too cut and dried. And also, Queen Elizabeth II was a very young woman, 6 days on the throne officially. And so my question for you is, having played Britain's Gloriana, is it a good opera? I think so. Why, if Queen Elizabeth II did not care for it, why might that have been? And how did you, in the 60th anniversary production at Covent Garden, approach it when Queen Elizabeth II was still alive? Just to be very clear, this is about Queen Elizabeth I and Robert of Essex and the story that's very often told.
Mm. Well, I think just to go back a little bit to the original performances, in fact, the E&O arrived in America just the year before I joined them, so I just missed out on that tour, sadly. But when it was, the original performances took place in 1953, the press made a huge deal about the fact that the applause was very muted on the opening night. But what then became apparent was that all the people that were there on that opening night were invited guests who'd been invited for the coronation. And in the 50s, people wore long evening gloves. So if you're clapping with evening gloves on, you're not going to get rapturous applause. It's going to be very muted. Apparently, after that first night, the subsequent performances were crazy. Everybody went crazy for it. So it's had a bit of a bad reputation, and slightly unjustly, I think. Cutting forward to when we did the piece in 2013, it was a production by Richard Jones, and he wanted, and it was brilliant because you can still get it on a DVD, by the way. He wanted it to be a reference to the coronation year. So he set it in 1953, and before a note was sung, we had actors who had their backs to the audience, but they were dressed as the young Queen Elizabeth, coming to sort of like a local church hall where this story of Elizabeth I was going to be played out as a performance, like a masque, if you like. So we had this thing of the Queen, young Queen, being met by the mayor and it then taken off. And then the curtain rose on something that was set in almost like an amateur operatic society in the 1950s. So there were so many references to the coronation year, but it was the story. And I don't know if you remember, there were films about Elizabeth and Essex with Olivia de Havilland, and it's rather sort of glamorous.
Betty Davis as well.
Yeah, and rather sort of glamorous Hollywood versions of Elizabethan dresses. So that's the route we went down with the costumes. So I was wearing huge Elizabethan dresses, but I had a very sort of bouffant 50s kind of red wig and everything. Mm-hmm. So it was a kind of mashup of 1953 and the Elizabethan era. And at the very end of the production, when the curtain came in, when Elizabeth I has died, and it ended up with the actors who played the young Queen coming back on as if to do the royal lineup, that you have at the end of a production when the royals come and greet you. And there was a sort of face-off between me and this actress. It was almost as if I was almost passing on the monarchy to her. So it was a very clever interweaving of this kind of reminiscent, nostalgic time. And I mean, lots of people who came to it were very immediately affected by things that they recognized from the 50s in Britain. It was very specific, and yet it had this Elizabethan style to it as well. And I think as far as the Queen is concerned, she was never a great opera lover, to be fair. And I don't think she made any bones about it. I mean, if she had a choice between going to the races and going to the opera, we didn't stand a chance. But that's fine. You can't love everything.
Yeah.
I think our king now is a different story. He's a great lover of classical music.
Yes.
So that might change, but one can't criticize her for not liking opera. That's the way it is.
So
but it was a wonderful.
Sorry, go ahead.
It was a wonderful production, and it was a fantastic role to play. lots and lots of background reading, lots and lots of what a clever woman she was, Elizabeth I, you know, multilingual. She could play instruments. She was very smart. She was very tough. And underneath that tough exterior was quite a fragile, frightened woman. So it was quite a complex character to play, which was absolutely what I love to do.
I'm going to get the DVD right away. I have two more questions about this. To your knowledge, was Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II aware or in any way saw your production that was done 60 years after?
I don't think, well, I know for sure she didn't come, but whether she was aware or not, I don't know. I mean, it was, I guess she may have seen it in the papers or something, I don't know. But,
yeah.
No, but she certainly didn't come.
The second question is, if I remember, because mind you, this is 40 plus years since I worked on it at the Met, there was talk of the Bloomsbury Circle. In other words, the writers in the 20s and early 30s who lived in Bloomsbury near the British Museum. Not Virginia Woolf, but was one of them wrote the story? Was it, what's his name? Leighton Strachey?
Yes, but that he wrote a fantastic book about Queen Elizabeth. Fantastic, which was like a go-to reference book. Yeah.
Because I met Peter Pears, who played Robert
Essex
in the original, and he told me that Benjamin Britten read a book that inspired
Strachey.
Leighton Strachey. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have, whenever we do roles or when we direct operas or coach operas, there's so much material that we can go to.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, Elizabeth I,
yeah,
never ending. I mean, there's so much stuff. Yeah.
Well, she's so differently presented in the Donizetti trio of operas, where we see her as a tiny girl in Anna Bolena. We see her in Giovanna Seymour. What's it called? I'm forgetting the second. Maria Stuarda, where
Stuarda,
faces off with Mary Stuart, and then especially in Roberto Devereux, which is the story of Essex. It's a very different kind of person from the person we see in Britain's Gloriana, which I commend to all viewers. And now that I know it's on DVD with Susan Bullock, that's the one that I'm going to watch.
It's the Royal Opera House, yes.
Yeah.
Richard Jones, yeah.
So you were in Atlanta working on, as you told me, an English translation of Bartók's Bluebeards Castle.
Yes.
Who is playing Bluebeard?
It's I'll tell you a little bit about this production. So during the lockdown, a British director called Daisy Evans and a British conductor called Stephen Higgins and Jerry Finley, the baritone, and myself had lots and lots of discussions about, will we ever work again? Will the theatres ever open? Are we all doomed to just sort of doing Zoom for the rest of our life, etc., etc.? And Daisy and Stevie had both had an idea to do Bluebeard in a different way, a completely different way. And by different, I mean, first of all, reducing the orchestra down to 7 players. Because of course we couldn't have more than so many people in a room at any one time, and also to have Bluebeard and Judith not as the big bad wolf and the young frightened girl, but as a couple, older couple who are living with dementia. The Judith is living with dementia, and so this came together. We were lucky enough to be able to go back to performing, and we found a place in London which used to be an old Welsh chapel, and it's now a space where you can put a production on or you can have a party. It's a bit of a dilapidated place. Worked really well for our idea. And we got players from the London Sinfonietta, and we put this on. And it was fascinating that every door that is opened in our production is things coming out of a trunk. They're memories. And Judith has, there's a wedding, there's a baby, there's husband going off to work to do a job and leaving her, there's the death of a child. It's quite fascinating. At the end, he gives her a mirror, And he says, you'll see my wife in the last door. And it's her, but she doesn't recognize herself. And all these other women who are played by actors are incarnations of Judith in various stages of her life. We worked a lot with the Alzheimer's Society of Great Britain and dementia awareness. And we did 14 performances. My baritone here is Michael Mays, American baritone.
Very good friend of mine. He was the guest on the show a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Wonderful, Mike. And we shared the performances in London. So I did some with him and some with Jerry Finley. And I've worked on Sweeney Todd with Mike and Dead Man Walking. So we know each other really well. And here at Atlanta Opera, they jumped on it. They thought it was a really interesting idea. And they have a series called Discoveries. So we're going to do 3 performances over next weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday at Kennesaw University. And we've got players from the Atlanta Opera Orchestra. And it's a fascinating take on it.
So for listeners who don't know it, sorry to interrupt, would you briefly, you referred to the doors, and I know this very well, but tell briefly the story of the 7 doors, and especially if you wish the 5th door, but.
Yeah, so Judith is taken to Bluebeards Castle. This is the traditional story. And behind every door is something. There's a torture chamber, there's a treasury, there's a beautiful garden, there's a kingdom, there's a lake of tears, and so on. And all of these are presented to her, and there are other women there that she assumes are his former lovers. In our concept, each one of these doors represents a part of their life that she can't remember anymore. So we have the first door is a young girl comes on, very beautiful, about to get married, and the second door is a wedding. The third door is the second door, sorry, is the husband going off to work and the sort of anxiety of being left. Then there's a wedding, and there's the birth of a child. There's the death of a child. There's also the big 5th door, which is when you've got the full orchestra, is crazy and overwhelming. It's still overwhelming in Stevie's reduction, actually. I have to say he's been incredibly clever how he's orchestrated it. In this one, it's Christmas. It's their kingdom, the family's kingdom. Every family is a little kingdom of its own, and it's Christmas, and there are children there, and Judith is watching them give gifts and be happy, but she doesn't remember who they are. She sort of has a flicker of memory, and there's a woman playing the Judith of that time. So it basically goes through a time scale over sort of 30, 40 years. And at the very end, she's just left looking in a mirror, and all the women come back on, and he says, this one was my morning, this was my lunch, my noon time, this was my evening time, and you are my night. And she almost gets there. She almost remembers. And when we did it in London, we weren't sure how it was going to be received, because it's quite a different take. But honestly, we got some of the best reviews any of us have ever had in our lives, and people were just beating the door down to see it. We're going to take it to New Zealand, hopefully going to go possibly to Seattle, maybe they're interested in it, Edinburgh Festival. So it's the sort of thing exactly that I love to do. It's slightly left field. It's not traditional stand and sing. It's a huge acting role. It's really devastating. And it's fantastic music done in a different way.
I'm not making a joke here at all about memory, but I'm trying to summon the name of an opera that I think might have been called A Coffin in Egypt, that was done at Opera Philadelphia a few years ago with Frederica von Stade and Marietta Simpson as 2 women with different stages of Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And it was a beautiful work, and I'm pretty sure it's called A Coffin in Egypt, but I'm not 100% certain. And because I know it starred von Stade, and she did 2 operas there. And it's a very hard thing to convey, not only dramatically, but musically,
Mm.
where there may be a degree of repetition or disjointedness, but it should not sound atonal, I don't think,
No,
in
no, no.
communicating
No, no, no. I
mental.
mean, we're
Yeah.
singing the music, you know, there's some very beautiful lyrical music. And I think the crux of this production is that it's not just about Judith and it's not just about Bluebeard. It's about, and Daisy, we did a symposium on it last night, and we had a neurologist there as well. And it was fantastic to hear what she had to say about, you know, how these stages progress. And Daisy summed it up beautifully by saying, in our production, there are two hearts on that stage. And, you know, what happens to Bluebeard, he's trying to deal with this person that's slipping out of his grasp by the minute. And, you know, it's about the caregiver and the person being cared for. And I think that's what's crucial to it, is that you see the struggle that he has, you know, trying not to lose his temper with her. And then she becomes randomly very violent or very weepy. And, you know, how do you deal with that? You don't know. It's so unpredictable. And in a way, people say, well, you know, that sounds great, but how does it work with the music? The music, when you hear it with that idea in your mind, it's perfectly written for it.
Yeah.
Perfectly written. Yeah.
I have cared for people with dementia, with Alzheimer's. I'm never going to tell the story publicly, but there was a very famous figure in opera, one of the most famous, who at the end of his life had Alzheimer's, and I was given responsibility for him.
Oh,
And
gosh.
he was someone who knew opera intimately, but forgot who he was and what he did and how to dress himself and so on. And he was a man who was very conscious of his appearance. And yet he always remembered melodies and lyrics. And and also a member of my own family who was a musician. The same thing happened, that when all the basic activities of daily living were no longer possible, the musical memory was there, and the language of the music was there,
Yes.
not the language of life.
There was a fantastic interview with Tony Bennett recently, where he couldn't really remember anything. The minute a few chords were played on the piano, he launched straight into a song and sang it word perfect. And this doctor that we met last night was saying that two things that are really important to people who are in this position are music and smell, scent. You know, you can smell a piece of clothing and it will immediately transport you back, or you can smell a particular flower, and even people who are, as you say, struggling to remember daily life can then suddenly recall. It was fascinating to hear how the brain works on that. Yeah. So
I'm really sorry that I cannot get to see this performance, because I
well, it
love
might
you.
happen somewhere
I
else.
love Michael. Had I known Jerry Finley, I mean, you know, I maintain a certain degree of neutrality, but Jerry Finley is one of my very favorite opera singers of all.
Well, they're going to do it in Canada. They're going to do it in Toronto. Sadly, I'm not free for that performance, but Jerry will be doing it with Adrienne Pajonka.
Yes. Okay.
In the spring in Toronto. So maybe you might find
Well, I'll go to
there.
Toronto and I'll go to Seattle.
Yeah, let's hope. Well, Seattle's not a deal. I'm just, if anybody out there from Seattle Opera's watching, we'd love to come, because they're very interested. Yeah.
Very good. So let's go to the big guy, Richard Wagner, one of the big guys.
Yeah.
You are a sensational Brunhilde, and thrilling for the acting, for the singing, for the language, as I said. When you work on a production of the Ring cycle, specifically Brunhilde, there are so many ways that one can go musically and dramatically, even though the words and the notes are constant. And when you were building your Brunhildes, and I always say there are three Brunhildes, because there's the Valkyria, the Siegfried, and the Götterdämmerung, and they're the same person, but at the very end of the cycle, she talks about everything she knows and that she's learned. And for me, Brunhilde is the best example in all of opera of someone learning.
Growing, yeah.
growing and learning, and making decisions, including rejecting her sister Valtrauta's entreaties and Götterdämmerung to come back and put everything right. And Brunhilde makes a break. She's courageous. She is, well, she's everything. But rather than me describe her, why don't you describe how you approached her and how you live with her?
Well, I think first and foremost, when you first meet her in Valkyra, she is a young girl. She's a daughter. She's quite a renegade. She's quite feisty. She stands up to her father. She stands up to Fricka, her stepmother. She loathes her. They don't actually have a big confrontation, but there's not a lot of love lost there between them. She's very aware of Wotan, her father, of the fact that they are two sides of the same coin. And she says, we're the same person. I'm just the other side of you. So they're very similar, which means, and in real life, when people are very similar, often they fight. And there's lots of emotion because the characteristics are the same. So I think, when you look at the Valkyra, and she has a lot of listening to do in Valkyra. He has that huge narration in Act 2. And I think that's one of the moments when she grows the most, and she barely sings a note because he's telling her all his story, and she's kind of analyzing it and absorbing it and working out, well, how do we go from here on? She takes matters into her own hand. She's strong-minded with Siegmund, and she's defiant. And then in the third act, she's with him, from Varis or Schmählich onwards. There's a real lot of love there, but because she's defied him and he's so proud and vain, he cannot forgive her. And so he sends her off to sleep and says, your godliness is being removed. So, you see this young girl growing in the Valkyra. And then when we see her in Siegfried, I always think of her like a baby deer that just can barely stand up. She's lost all her power. It's all been taken away from her. She doesn't know who it is who's waking her up. Whoever wakes her up is she ends up with. And
18 years on.
Yeah. And that's kind of terrifying. And she's, because she hasn't got all the backing of this kind of Hoya to Ho and all the sisters, and they're tearing around the place, kind of crazy, fiery, feisty women, she's suddenly terribly vulnerable. And she's dealing with a subject that she's only had a glimpse of in the Valkyra, which was love between a man and a woman, between Siegmund and Sieglinde. And that really affected her. And now she's in this position of falling in love with Siegfried, but she doesn't know how to handle it because it's not her. She has no knowledge of it. So it's a wonderful transition from this kind of goddess to a young girl to a young woman, or a woman falling in love, and all the sort of reality of that in Siegfried, and how they sort of dance around each other all through that huge duet. And of course, you have to wait until the end of the opera to make your appearance. Mm-hmm. So the opera's been going like 4 hours, 5 hours or something. And then you come on right at the end of the night. And there's this ecstatic love duet, but it takes a long time to reach boiling point because they're very they're dancing around each other. By the time we get to Götterdämmerung, this is a strong woman with real human love for Siegfried, and she's brave, and she lets him go off on the Rhine journey, and she doesn't want anything to do with the gods anymore. She's obviously Valtrauta, her sister, comes and she says, no, I'm not interested, this is my life now. You can tell him I don't want to come back. I don't want to see anybody. I don't want to be part of that world anymore. And then we see her dealing with huge evil, and with Hagen and the Gibichungs, and manipulation, and how they manipulate Siegfried, and then how he rejects her, and this huge pain in all of that for her. She has to use all her wits about her to deal with these people, and by the end, in the immolation scene, she realizes that the only way for the world to progress is for it to be burned down and for everybody to start again, because this whole story, right from the beginning of Das Rheingold, which Brunhilde, of course, isn't in, right to the end of Götterdämmerung, has just, there's no way back from the things that have happened. So when you go to do a ring cycle, although you've got all that information, for me, and it's the same with any role, if you repeat it, you have to show up with a blank page. You can't, otherwise, how do you do it? It just becomes rote, and that's not interesting. It's not interesting as a performer just to kind of churn it out the way you've always done it. Nor is it interesting for the audience, because they're not seeing anything that's fresh. So for me, it's fascinating to take the same material and turn it on its head and do it in a completely different way every time.
For all that I've studied the Ring, I've led Ring symposia around the world and love it. And people associate me with Italian opera, and that's true. But I deeply, deeply love other operas, and especially the Ring cycle, which I live with. And yet there's more for me to learn and find out. And here's a question I've never asked of Brunhilde. And I'm sure I could look in the score, but I'd like to know your impression on this. When she is awakened by Siegfried at the end of the opera Siegfried, we in the audience know that Siegfried is the son of Siegmund and Sieglinde, Siegmund having been killed in battle and Sieglinde dying in childbirth, Siegfried having been raised by Mima in the forest. He's a kind of a nature boy, and he's innocent, but he's brave and so forth. Does she immediately know that this is the son of Siegmund and Sieglinde? Or is she first attracted to this handsome, brave guy who woke her up after 18 years, allegedly to save her? And if she doesn't know, at what point does it click? And at what point does she decide, well, I don't care if he's the son of my cousins or whatever they are to her?
Yeah, well, I mean, he does announce it very early on. He says, Siegfried bin ich, dich erwacht, right at the beginning. So I think from then on, she's like, okay, let's go. But then when we hear in the Ewig war ich later on, when she sings, she says, I always was there, I always am there, I always will be there. So there's a kind of back knowledge that she kind of knew this was who he was going to be. But she says, wer ist der Mann, der mich erweckt? If I don't remember something, and he says, and there's a big, and then she sings, oh, Siegfried, Siegfried. So she knows then, because he's told her. But I'm sure that when she first, I'm the way I see it anyway, is that when she is first, he kisses her awake. And I think those first few bars before he comes out with that announcement of who he is, I think she's absolutely terrified. I don't think she knows how to deal with it. If you're waking up after a huge long sleep, you haven't got all your wits around you. What does she do? How does she deal with it? All those thoughts are going through her mind. And she says, but who is it? Who is it? Tell me who it is who's woken me up. And then he says, but it's Siegfried. And I think then sort of one layer of fear goes, but probably another layer of panic takes its place.
Yeah, because she's also feeling literally her body, her bones, her sinews, after having been asleep for 18 years surrounded by magic fire.
Yeah, that's what I mean. She's like a baby, baby doe that gets up and kind of its legs sort of. I know when we did it at Covent Garden, Keith Warner had a thing about, when you first come, I appeared through a door. I remember it. And then he said, when you first start to walk on the floor, almost be unsure how to do it. It's like your legs have atrophied, your muscles.
Remember that. It made such sense to me. But I'm asking not because there's a single right way to do this, because that's part of the wonderful thing about the ring
joy,
cycle. But I've always wondered with the Brunhilde, there's probably not much moral questioning within herself, because the moral questioning in Wagner's ring cycle is a whole other universe from a lot of the moral issues that well, let's put it this way. When I teach The Ring, I always say it's a work of art that's not cognizant of organized religion.
No. And also, I think the person who is morally aware is Fricka. I mean, she's horrified. She's horrified by the fact that Siegmund and Sieglinde are twins, and that you know, and that's the whole crux of her argument in Act 2 of Valkyrie with Wotan that Brunhilde listens to, is you know, that this is disgusting that these two are together, and you know, and she hates them for that. And but I think the rest of us are not maybe as traditionally morally aware. Let's put it that way.
So I'm taking a diversion from the subject, but I'm actually sticking with it. When I teach opera, I like to teach about what I call the old believers. And Fricka is an old believer. Ortrud and Lohengrin is an old believer. I believe that Kostelnička in the Kostelnička, Yennefer, is an old believer. I believe that Marfa in Kovančina, which is a fabulous opera, a fabulous role, is an old believer par excellence. And these old believers, I'm not judging them, but they occupy a certain pole in opera that they react differently. Ortrud and Lohengrin is a very different character from the others I mentioned. But you've played the Kostelnička.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Do you see, am I going too far in making connections with people like Fricka? Do you see her that way, or is she unto herself? What she has done is she has killed the child that Yennefer has given birth to because she considers it, well, I'll leave that up to you. Does she consider it morally offensive, or will Yennefer have no future life if she's known to have a child?
I think with Kostelnička, it's a double-edged sword, because she, in the beginning of the piece, sings an aria, sings a section where she relates her former life to Yennefer and says, "Look, I had a husband that beat me. He used to leave me alone. He'd go off and get drunk, and I had a horrible life, and I don't want that for you." And the guy that's the father of the baby, Steva, is a carbon copy of the Kostelnička's husband. And she says, "Look, this guy is no good for you. I don't want you to have anything to do with him." And I think as long as we really pay attention to that section, then all her actions subsequently, where she takes the baby and puts it under the ice, all stem from a misguided way of doing it, obviously, but a way of wanting to prevent the same course of action happening for somebody else. So basically, it comes from a place of love and care, but it kind of goes horribly wrong. And, you know, and also a great moral background. I mean, she's the sexton of the village, and, you know, this great, everything has to look right for people. And she takes her off into the woods so that nobody sees her with this baby. And she lies about where she's been, saying she's been to Vienna. And when she hasn't, you know, she's been giving birth out in the woods to an illegitimate child. But I think however convoluted it becomes, it all starts from a kind of basic moral backbone plus a place of love, really. And I suppose in a way you can see Fricka, although Fricka loves a bit of power. I mean, we can see that in Rheingold. You know, she's desperate. She's desperate for the power. She likes to be in top position, and that's why she doesn't like Brunhilde, because Brunhilde is the favorite. Even over his own wife, he favors his daughter the most. So it's a slightly different ballgame, but I think it is to do with caring, you know, a moral tradition that they are glued to and can't bend from.
I'm not one who easily equates contemporary politics in life with things in opera, but we have seen examples of world leaders who have preferred and loved their daughters more than their wives.
Of course.
And I mention this only because when people say to me, opera is not relevant, opera is not realistic, to me, opera is the most profoundly instructive art form on the human condition. And what
Completely.
you and I have been talking about so far is really all of that.
Yeah. And the things that we're asked to do as singers are sometimes so way out of our normal experience. I mean, the role of Electra, for example, yeah, you know, Brunhilde, Kostanichka, all of those things. But those things happen in life, you know. I'm waiting for somebody to write the opera about the current events in the United Kingdom, actually. I think we're, you know, we're politically in such a nightmare at the moment that that will make a fantastic piece one day.
But do you think that that could be viewed, well, when I talk about opera, I always say that it should not be a literal depiction of events, but focusing on certain emotional truths that are human truths that are experienced. So sometimes a single moment, for example, in one of my very favorite operas, Strauss's Electra, she's so focused on an event that happened that she just can't get over, that that everything that grows out of her actions, that become her actions, grows out of that memory of her mother having, or her mother's lover having killed her father.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, that you could equate that to modern day life, where that could happen within a family, and somebody goes off and shoots somebody, or you know, what you know, humans behave in good ways and appalling ways towards each other, and that is reflected in opera as well. It is a reflection. It's an expression, as you say, of the human condition.
I'm combing my mind for some of the roles you've played. Have you ever played a very good woman? I mean, I think Brunhilde is a very good woman, but someone who's just
nice. No. I've played people like Michaela when I was young, and I was bored stiff. I couldn't. I just can't do nice. You know, it doesn't awaken anything in me at all. I like these complicated, multi-layered, complex, difficult people.
In doing some research on you, I discovered that you played a role, or are to play it, I don't know, at the Opera Comique. Missy Mazzoli's Breaking the Waves, you played the mother.
Yes.
That to me is a fabulous opera.
Yeah, we did it.
How many people know it? Yeah.
I did it at the very last minute in the Edinburgh Festival, just before in 2019, I guess. Yeah, before lockdown anyway. The original cast member had a family problem, so I had to learn it very, very quickly. And it was fantastic to be in it. And of course, Missy and Royce Fabric, the librettist, were there.
Yeah.
And you know, we all became great friends, and so we're going to do it again in the spring in a slightly less hurried version for me, with actual rehearsals, because I literally just got off the plane and did it. So at least I'll get a chance to explore it in a bit more depth now.
For people who don't know, that was a film, I believe the director was Lars von Trier.
Lars von Trier, yeah.
And it was set in Scotland in the oil industry. And it was about a young woman who falls in love with a man, and he has a terrible injury.
That's right.
Paralyzing injury. And I think it's a modern masterpiece. I saw it at its world premiere in Philadelphia. And it's really a spectacular work. And I point to it and certain other works when people say there's no good contemporary opera.
Yes, there's plenty of good contemporary opera.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, talking of that particular piece, Breaking the Waves, yet again, I play a mother who's very moral, very strict, very unbending, and very harsh towards her daughter until it's too late.
Yeah.
You know, which is terrible. And then, no, there's some fantastic, I mean, I think we met when I did Greek at Brooklyn,
yes, in Brooklyn.
Academy of Music. I mean, Mark Turnage, what a great composer he is.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's lots of good stuff happening.
So combing my memory, would that be about 2009, I think?
No, the Greek at Brooklyn was 2018.
18, that's right. You did Electra at the Met in 2009. That's actually when I met you.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Fantastic. I went to all 6.
You did.
I did.
Well done. You must get,
Well, you
that's
did,
good.
so I had
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
It's, as
That's
I said, it's really
fantastic.
one of my very favorite operas.
Yeah, yeah,
And I heard you in Toronto as Mom, as Clytemnestra. Is that
yeah,
correct? Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And I'm
yeah.
going to do it again in a new production in Frankfurt in the spring
Hmm.
with Klaus Gut. Yeah, it's the sort of it's the journey. Old Electras never die; they just
Yeah,
become Clytemnestra. And old Yenufas never die; they become the Kostelichka. So
it's true.
it's a wonderful journey to be on now. To be where I was the daughter, now I'm the mum, and to know the piece backwards from another angle, and then to see it through somebody else's eyes.
Hmm.
It's quite fascinating. I mean, Electra feels like a totally different piece to me now because I'm not Electra anymore.
Can you, I don't want to say separate, but playing the mother or playing a facing character to the heroine who you used to play, um, does the knowledge, does the sense memory of having played the younger character inform the way you create the older character, or do you start from a blank
Start from
page?
scratch. Start
Yeah.
from scratch. Yeah. Start from scratch. Of course, the music is deep in your DNA. I mean, I've done 17 different productions of Electra, in my time. So lots and lots and lots of performances as Electra. So the music is deep within you. But when you take on a new role, again, I bought a new score. I didn't use my score, a blank page, because my
I
score
love
is full
that.
of stuff, writing, and same with Yenufa. It's all my notes from everything else are in that old score as that character. So I thought, no, I need to have a new score now, and I need to start again. I don't know this piece. How does it go?
So again, I'm not naming names, but a famous and I would say legendary senior artist with her perfectly marked up scores has now been giving her scores away to younger artists with the idea that this person would be right for that role and this person would be right for that role. And I've had the opportunity with conductors, especially with Rossini, to study scores that they've marked up, and then they intend that these scores be left, in this case, in Pesaro in the Rossini archive and library.
Yeah.
At the New York Philharmonic, they have a wonderful archive that goes back to its very beginnings in 1842. And there are Dvorak scores and Mahler scores that are beautifully marked by the composers. And have you thought about what happens to your scores?
Well,
You're
you
not
can't.
you're not
You
as
can't.
old as this very
No, but
senior artist
you
I'm talking
can't.
about.
In my scores, I write so much stuff. You can hardly. I mean, people look at my scores, they go, "How do you even see the notes in there?" Because there's so much stuff. I haven't actually thought about it, but if somebody wants them and they can make head or tail of my scrawling, and a lot of it is "shut up" or "count, you idiot," or writing messages to myself. They're welcome to them if I don't. Once I don't need them anymore, but I mean, to me, I'd rather lose all my luggage than lose my score.
Yeah.
So the score always comes with me on an aeroplane in hand luggage. I don't care if I never see my clothes again, but they're like Bibles, all
Yeah.
your experience, all your coaching, all your life experience, and every different conductor's views and thoughts and director's ideas, they're all in there. And if that goes, then that's a huge loss.
I ask because a big part of opera, certainly my end where I work, is the oral tradition and the passing down of what we have learned. And you and I are basically contemporaries. And I began working professionally in opera when I was 16. And I learned from masters when I was 16, and by 20 had worked with some of the greatest people in Italian opera in that case, but have been very fortunate through my life. And I take it very seriously that I document everything that I've learned. And this program that we're doing is part of that initiative, because when I'm gone, I want people to know what I've learned. I don't want to take it with me, so to speak.
No, of course, yes.
And master classes are a big part of that. And I can say that not every great opera singer is a great teacher.
Mm,
I've seen videos of you teaching, and you are a great teacher.
thank you.
And I think part of it is something we alluded to earlier when we were talking about Brunhilde being a listener.
Mm,
You, Hildegard Behrens, Christine Goerke are singers I point to as being great listeners on the stage. Leonie Rieseneck was a great listener. And therefore, with this listening, when I've seen you do master classes, you bring a lot more to what you give the young artist than might another singer who would refine a trill or something, which is great
mm.
too. But Thomas Allen is another person who does this incredibly well. You really dig in a caring but serious way. And is it a challenge, let's say, if you find a singer who's just not getting what you're saying?
Well, I think, you know, as a, and I've talked with Tom about this, Tom Allen, about how you go about masterclasses. And I think I don't really like the term masterclass because that immediately gives a kind of hierarchy. So I always say at the very beginning, look, I'm not here pretending that I know everything. I'm here just to listen to you and see if what I hear and how I can react to that, if I can maybe help you in some way. And I think you don't have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of a chance to kind of, you don't know the person, you don't know what their personality is like. So you have to make very swift decisions. And sometimes with singers, you think, okay, technically that's a bit of a minefield, but I can't fix that in 20 minutes or half an hour. You know, you need time to do that. So let's find a way of maybe trying to get around that in another way, to open their imagination, to think about the text, to go back to the score and look at the dynamics and look at the markings that the composer, because very often people learn things and then that kind of just dissipates a bit. And I think, you know, go back to I always say, if the instructions are on the can, you could make the meal, you know. And that's the thing, because if you look at what they've taken painstaking hours to, you know, to write dynamics and directions, then you're halfway there, more than halfway there. So I think I always see my role when I do those classes as trying to open up people's horizons a little bit. And if there are things that, you know, you can see are clearly technically not quite right, and you can fix them in that time that you've got, then go ahead. If not, you know, allude to it, refer to it, say, look, I really think you need to look at how you approach that. But, you know, we haven't got time now to fix that because you're limited. But I think the bottom line of all of it is that just be kind. Just be kind, because they're not, you know, it's not easy. It's not, I did it as a young singer. I sang to Schwarzkopf and all these people. And, you know, it's frightening. These are people, you stand in front of them and you think, oh my God, what if they hate me? And, you know, you get all nervous. And I think, you know, I always say, just relax, relax, relax. Not an exam, you know, it's not an audition. We're just here working together, trying to find a way through this piece. And take it or leave it, really. You know, if you don't like, please say if you don't agree or understand. But I think the bottom line is, it's not about you. It's not, when I sang the song, I sang it like this. Nobody cares. It's about that young singer and how they want to sing it. And they will hopefully have come with some ideas. And so you have to then try and help them develop that in the best way you can.
When I've done coaching and teaching, sometimes it's in front of an audience, which I'm fine with audiences, but I find it becomes a performance, and I try to avoid that because I want to work with the young artist. And audiences are looking for a degree of learning, but also entertainment. But when I'm working privately with a singer, and often we have longer time spans to work, a challenge that I face is that a lot of these characters, as you beautifully described today, are complex and sometimes have very bad intentions or character flaws, let's say, that make them less than sterling people. That said, having to awaken that in the person I'm dealing with, especially if he or she is 25 and has not had certain life experiences, is a challenge, because also, frankly, in our very modern times, when people give different definitions to gender identities, to preferences of all kinds. And I don't judge, but people often bring who they are to the character they're playing. And sometimes I try to say, in a polite, non-offensive way, you have to leave that person who you are a bit at the door and enter who this character is,
Well,
and his, her, their
that's the basis of any
makeup.
acting role,
Yeah.
theatre, straight theatre, or films, or it's not you. You're not that person.
So I'm asking you for tips because you're really good at this. How do you bring that out of them without, number one, giving offense, because there's such sensitivities now? I mean, obviously in the past it was callous, Callous in the other direction, and we need to find a balance, I believe. But
well, I think you know,
I just don't get through to them. That's the point.
I think having I think one of the most important things is to be aware of contemporary culture. And, you know, if you can refer to something, a current film or a current TV program or a podcast or something like that, that you think these people might have heard or know about, sometimes that can spark, or something in the news or something, you know, whatever. I think to try and bring in other elements that might just spark an image or an idea that they can relate to. You know, I mean, it's very hard to try and teach somebody how to play an all-powering goddess, you know. I mean, because what do any of us know about that? You know, we don't know. But I think, you know, you can try and find contemporary references and things like that. I think that often helps. Certainly I've found that with, you know, certain masterclasses I've done in colleges and things. If you refer to even a TV, you know, so-and-so on TV, you know, how that guy behaved like that, or how she reacted to him. That's what we're trying to find in this character right now, or something like that. So,
well, often the challenge for me is if I'm teaching a character, coaching a character that has a very strong sexual component, Don Giovanni, Carmen, the Duke of Mantua and Rigoletto, all the characters in Così fan tutte. Sometimes younger people, and I think this is good, don't suffer the strains and stresses that the older characters did and older people remember. And therefore you have to awaken in them the friction that existed. That Carmen is a rebel, she's an outcast, she is all kinds of things. You said you sang Micaela in your early years. Micaela can seem sexless or just a different kind of girl, so to speak. But I always believe that she has her own very strong feeling.
Well, she's got some strength because she, you know, she goes off on her own to find him. And as she says at the beginning of the aria, here I am, you know, I mustn't be frightened. I mustn't be frightened because I'm on a mission to find Don Jose. So she's not a complete sort of wet weekend, you know, she's got some power to her, but, you know, she's not an outwardly, overtly sort of sexy, charismatic personality, shall we say, like Carmen is. But it's a fascinating road to go down to try and convey what characters or how characters could be. I mean, of course, then, you know, you can get somebody to do something and then they show up to a production and they say, well, we're going to put you in a leopard skin, you know, bear outfit or something, and then, you know, all that goes out of the window. So I think, you know, the main thing I would say to any singer is just be flexible, be open, be young or old singers, really, you know, don't get stuck in a rut, give everything a go. And then, you know, you can say, well, look, I've tried, but I don't get it. Give me another reference or give me another idea, but give stuff a go first.
Did I read that you have done non-operatic acting, which is to say Goneril and King Lear?
Yes.
How did that come about?
Talking of Tom Allen, he was the Duke Gloucester. Well, Keith Warner, who's opera director with whom I've worked many times over the years, always had a thing that he got very upset when critics said, "Oh, opera singers can't act," and he said, you know, because he directs straight theatre as well, and he said, you know, some of the best acting I've ever witnessed has come from opera singers, and so he really kind of disputed that. And he had a dream, and John Tomlinson and Kim Begley, a tenor, British tenor, they had this pipe dream to do King Lear and cast it all with opera singers. And we did it last summer. So we had John Tomlinson as Lear, Tom Allen as Gloucester, myself as Goneril, Louise Alder as Cordelia, Emma Bell as Regan, my husband Richard Barclay Steele as Albany. We had Kim Begley as the Fool, Chris Gillett. I mean, the whole list. They were all British opera singers, and we did it at a festival called the Grange Festival, and it was the most amazing experience. It was fantastic. Absolutely, I'd love to.
What did you learn doing that?
Well, it was interesting. I learned about how. Well, it reminded me of how, as a singer, we are kind of hemmed in a good way by pitch, by rhythm, by bar lines, by dynamics. Everything is spelled out. As an actor, you can pick the pitch of your voice, you can pick the speed at which you say the line, you can pitch the dynamic, how you want it to be, and you can change it. It doesn't have to be the same every time. There's nobody beating time and saying, you've got to get to the end of that sentence in this bar, you know. It was this total freedom, which was really liberating and invigorating. Yeah, it was.
And will you take what you learned there back into the opera world in any way?
Of course.
Or perhaps in song repertory?
Yeah, it's all about spontaneity, and I think to be spontaneous. And I always say to singers, you know, in coachings and things, I want you to sing this as though the ink is still wet. You've never seen this piece before. Be a jazz singer, improvise, you know, pretend that you're just making it up. And I think that kind of freshness that you get from straight acting is something that has to come into, and should be there anyway in operatic acting as well. Operatic acting, I hate the word operatic acting, acting in an opera. It's the same thing, but it should, you know.
So you neatly led to my next question.
Oh.
I, as listeners know, often ask my guests to pick things from the Adagio catalog that they find inspiring, interesting, or worth sharing. And you selected two performances by Eileen Farrell. Eileen Farrell being the great American soprano, regular gal, I think it's fair to say, straight shooting, foul-mouthed, fantastically gifted and talented artist, who is among the opera singers who most wonderfully sings American popular song and jazz so well that sometimes the knowledge of that overwhelms her reputation. She's no longer alive as an opera singer, and she didn't sing all that much opera. She did a lot in concert versions with Stokowski, with Leonard Bernstein and others. And why Eileen Farrell?
Eileen Farrell is who I would like to be. I just love her. I think, you know, anybody that can record the songs that she sang, the songs of Harold Arlen, she sang duets with Frank Sinatra. She did all that. I mean, I love that repertoire. I do a lot of it myself anyway, but I just love that world so much. And then go and sing the operatic roles that she sang with this incredible voice. And to me, she's the epitome of what a singer should be, in that she's a singer. She's not an opera singer or a early music singer or a contemporary music singer. She's a singer, and she sings everything. And she sings everything with the same intention, the same passion, the same love, the same care. And to me, that is the epitome of what a singer should be.
Have you ever read the biography of her by my dear late friend Brian Kello?
I haven't, no, but I will.
I
need to.
I will see Gloriana by you, and you need to get
It's a
Brian's
deal.
book, Brian
Okay,
Killo.
I will.
Brian used to be the editor of Opera News. He was one of my dearest friends, and he sadly died of a brain tumor much too young. And he wrote 5 fantastic books about women in the arts. And I think the one he loved doing the most was Eileen, as he called it. He did Ethel Merman, people like that. You also selected Astrid Varnay singing Electra. To me, that needs no further explanation but why among all the Electras, Astrid Varnay?
Because she sings what's on the page.
Okay.
She sings the dynamics. She sings what Strauss wrote. And so she completely dissolves the myth that Electra is just a big scream fest, because it's not. No. And she sings with great sensitivity, great care of the text, great care of the dynamics. And to me, that's a true performance.
I always love going back to Electra, the opera. I've seen so many productions. I've worked on a couple. It is the opera that I would love to direct if I ever go back to directing. And a question I always ask myself looking at the score and the text, but especially the score, is, does she die? And if she does, at what point does she die? At the end of toward the end of the opera?
Well, that's a very good question. Have I died? Yes. Have I died? No. Have I shot myself? Yes. Have I shot Chrysothemis? Yes. Have I? Yeah. Oh, so I've done some crazy, some crazy ones. I think a little bit of her is dead from the very beginning, actually. I think she's pretty dead until she sees Orest. And then when Orest has come back, a little bit more of her dies. So whether she dies full stop or whether she's slowly dying through the piece, I don't know. It's a very interesting question. I think it's very open-ended.
Because to me, I hear it in the music. I hear it at a very specific moment.
There is a yeah, right, yeah.
And absolutely. Then Chrysothemis calls out and sees what is left, and then the music briefly laments and then hammers home the impact of the story. I've seen productions of it by very fine directors who I admire, where she just sort of goes cold. And that to me is very disappointing after everything that's been built up. So that the final hammer in the orchestra falls. It doesn't work for me, because she just sort of froze into place.
I think she can collapse, absolutely, and should. Because that music is all about building up to a point where there's like an explosion. You know, it can't get any more outrageous and out there. So something's got to give. So it's like there's a huge explosion. And then is she just like a wreck on the floor, or is she dead, or is she just completely spent? I think that's open for interpretation. But I think there should be some kind of complete disintegration of her.
I had the good fortune of knowing somewhat, not very well, but somewhat, the actress Diana Rigg, and who played a lot of Greek heroines. And she was a fantastic Medea. And she did a production of Medea where everything came crashing down around her. And it was it was done in London and then New York. And
I remember
both places.
Yeah.
And I had dinner with her once at Jay Sheehy, a restaurant in London, we know. And she said to me that she wished that only for one day could she be an opera singer, so that she could play Electra, but in the production of Medea, where everything crashes down. She says, because it's in the music, that crash. And ever since, I think of my prospective opera production of Medea with that crash.
Yeah, I mean, a crash is a good term, I think. I think it is a crash, whether it's a terminal crash or just a kind of, just, because she's got nothing left.
It's the fall of the house of Agamemnon.
Yeah.
And I see the house coming down, and why not? Everything else happens.
Oh, yeah.
Susan, This has really been fantastic. I know we could speak a lot longer.
Go on forever, I think.
This has been a master class, and I mean it. I love when I speak to artists who teach me immense things and awaken thoughts in me, and that's what's happened today. We could have spoken about Marian Wozzeck that I saw you do, and
Oh, yes.
many roles. So I hope in life sometime we will sit down, perhaps at a table, but perhaps in front of an audience, and can continue this kind of discussion.
I'd
And I'm
love to.
very sorry I'm not seeing you in Bluebeard in Atlanta. That concept
No.
sounds, I'm not into
Yeah.
every concept. That one sounds perfect.
Yeah, I really hope people will come and support us, because
Yeah.
it's a wonderful, it is, I mean, you know, it's a wonderful thing to be in. We're all completely in love with it, and it's a fantastic experience.
And what are the dates?
Next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so 7, 8, and 9
Of
of
October
October.
2022.
And Saturday, I think, is being streamed live by the Atlanta Opera, and they're doing a deal about watching things online for free for a while. So if
Okay.
anybody's interested, they can get onto the Atlanta Opera website and check it out.
So listen, y'all, if you're in Georgia right now, I want you to vote for the right woman for governor.
I wish I had a vote, but sadly not.
She's great. She's our Brunhilde.
Okay.
And y'all get to the opera and go see Susan and Michael, the wonderful Michael Mays.
Michael Mays, yeah,
in
wonderful.
Bluebeards Castle. Susan, thank you. It's been
You're more than welcome.
very
It's been a
special.
pleasure.
Okay,
Pleasure.
see you soon.